Case 1. The Murder of Beverly Jarosz, 1964, Garfield Heights, OH. It was December 28, 1964. Snow dusted the rooftops of Garfield Heights, Ohio, as families settled in after the holidays. But on Thornton Avenue, one family's world collapsed. 16-year-old Beverly Jarosz was found strangled and stabbed inside her own bedroom. More than half a century later, the town still remembers the silence that followed the scream. Beverly was home alone that afternoon. Her mother had stepped out to visit relatives, her younger sister was away, and her father was at work. The teenager, a bright student and aspiring writer, had just finished speaking on the phone with a friend minutes before she was killed. When her mother returned around 4:30 p.m., she discovered the horror inside. Beverly's room had been ransacked. The window was open. Her body lay on the floor, strangled and stabbed, though not sexually assaulted. There were no clear signs of forced entry. It was a shocking, calculated attack, one that immediately shattered the illusion of suburban safety. The Garfield Heights Police Department launched a swift investigation. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, collecting statements, and searching for anyone who may have seen something suspicious. The Cuyahoga County authorities soon joined, amplifying resources and pressure. Dozens of potential witnesses were questioned, tips flooded in, but no suspect emerged. The Ohio Attorney General's office classified the case as an open homicide under case number 2032. Though authorities believed the killer likely knew Beverly or had stalked her movements, no solid lead could be confirmed. No murder weapon was ever recovered. The crime scene offered too few answers for a time when forensic science was still primitive. As the years dragged on, the case grew colder. In the 1960s, DNA testing didn't exist. Fiber analysis was unreliable. Partial prints and trace evidence couldn't yield definitive results. Investigators held on to what they could: Beverly's diary, the room layout, a few fragments of clothing, but nothing brought them closer to a name. Decades passed. Detectives retired. Boxes of evidence were stored in basements and evidence rooms. From time to time, surges of public interest would reignite hope. Journalists wrote retrospectives. Local stations aired specials. Yet even with renewed attention, no charges were ever filed, and no one was held accountable for what happened in that house. Unlike some cold cases that are cracked with a single swab of DNA, Beverly's murder remains frustratingly elusive. In 2024, as the 60th anniversary approached, the Garfield Heights Police Department issued new public appeals. Press conferences were held. Social media campaigns asked for any shred of forgotten memory. But still, no forensic genealogy breakthrough, no killer's name. Police say the case remains aggressively investigated, but the reality is haunting. No physical evidence has yet yielded a viable suspect. What investigators do have is the belief that someone, alive today, still knows something. And that silence has become its own kind of cruelty. Over the decades, several people were questioned. Former classmates, neighbors, individuals with ambiguous ties to the Jarosz family. One theory revolved around a former admirer, a boy who'd once asked Beverly on a date. Another rumor suggested a stalker who had followed her walk to school. But no arrest was ever made. No one was charged. Every person of interest was either cleared by circumstantial evidence or lacked the forensic tie needed for a conviction. Despite the whispers, despite the suspicions, the city of Garfield Heights never saw a courtroom verdict. The killer, it seems, vanished into time. There is no resolution, not yet. Theories have swirled, some suggesting a crime of passion, others a premeditated act by someone who knew her schedule intimately. Some believed she was targeted by someone obsessed, a person who saw her not as human, but as an idea they wanted to control or destroy. But no official motive has ever been established. Without a suspect, without a confession, speculation is all that remains. And the deeper tragedy is this: Beverly Jarosz's story has no ending. Just a beginning, a brutal middle, and a long, unanswered silence that stretches across generations. Her family never stopped grieving. Over the years, her parents made public pleas for justice. Her sister, years later, spoke of the hole left behind. Local news stations have covered the case in every decade since, on anniversaries, on retrospectives, on specials about unsolved murders. For Garfield Heights, it's more than a cold case. It's a wound that never healed. Today, a framed photo of Beverly still sits on the family's mantle, and on Thornton Avenue, neighbors still remember where they were when they heard the news. The house may have changed hands, but the story lingers. It always will. Thank you for your incredible support. This channel thrives because of viewers like you. Join our YouTube membership today to unlock exclusive perks, enjoy premium content, and help us keep creating the stories you love. Which story do you want to be covered? Case 2. The disappearance of Brian Randall Schaffer. On the night of March 31, 2006, the city of Columbus throbbed with energy. Spring break had just begun at The Ohio State University, and High Street was alive with neon reflections bouncing across wet pavement. Students moved in clusters, the hum of conversation trailing into bars like the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a second-floor hotspot in the newly developed South Campus Gateway. Inside, music rattled the rafters. Cameras at the bar entrance captured a constant flow of celebration. Young adults on the edge of new careers, new relationships, new problems, or new beginnings. Among them was Brian Randall Schaffer, a second-year medical student and the pride of his family. Brian was 27, tall, athletic, 6 feet 2 inches, and almost always smiling in photos. He'd weathered a devastating loss just 3 weeks earlier, when his mother died from a bone marrow disorder. Friends noticed how he tried to appear strong, the same easygoing Brian. But heartbreak has a way of turning loud rooms into hollow spaces. His father, Randy, invited him to dinner on March 31st to check on him, unaware it would be their final meal together. They discussed future plans, a trip to Miami with Brian's girlfriend Alexis Wagoner the following week, a getaway Brian seemed genuinely excited for. Nothing about his demeanor that Friday evening signaled what was to come. Later that night, Brian met up with his friend Clint Florence for bar hopping. At around 1:15 a.m., the two men returned to the Ugly Tuna, stepping off the escalator into the bar. The moment was recorded on surveillance, a timestamp locked to the second. The camera caught Brian again around 1:55 a.m. near the bar's entrance, talking with two women. The area glowed under the harsh eye of a mounted camera. Brian laughed, leaned in slightly to be heard over the noise, then turned and walked back inside. That action, a simple decision to step just a few feet deeper into the crowd, was the last confirmed sighting of him. When the lights came up at 2 a.m. and security swept patrons out the door, Brian was gone. The next morning, when he missed calls and didn't show up for his planned vacation, family and friends assumed he had overslept or needed time alone. But his car remained parked at his apartment. His room was undisturbed. His wallet and keys were untouched. His phone was quiet. Concern turned to fear quickly, especially because Brian was a creature of responsibility, a student entering one of the most demanding medical careers possible. His father contacted police to file a missing person report, which immediately escalated to the missing persons unit of the Columbus Division of Police. What investigators found on the surveillance footage caused immediate alarm. Cameras showed Brian entering the bar. Cameras caught him chatting outside the door. Cameras recorded almost everyone who passed through that entry point, except Brian leaving. In a place saturated with college students and wide-angle lenses, a single man vanished like smoke. Detective Andre Edwards of the Columbus Division of Police became a key figure in the search. With the FBI Violent Criminal Apprehension Program listing the case, NamUs MP 1709, and images of Brian uploaded to federal missing person databases, investigators launched a full-scale response. The Ugly Tuna Saloon was a maze that night. The main escalator served as the only public entrance and exit, monitored by cameras. But the building, undergoing construction, had a poorly lit service corridor behind the bar leading to the ground floor. That path doubled as a worker-only access room, winding through equipment staging areas and temporary barriers. Footage from that section was limited or non-existent because the security focus had been aimed outward toward the public-facing entrance. Detective Edwards later told reporters that he was 100% sure Brian did not exit via the escalator. That meant one thing. If Brian left alive, he must have taken the service area route. But that corridor, pointed out construction crews, led not to a safe street, but to a partially enclosed alley under renovation. To walk through it would be like navigating a construction zone blindfolded. Uneven ground, scaffolding, portable walls, blind corners. Building workers interviewed later said they never saw anyone matching Brian's description stumble through at 2 a.m., but they also admitted they weren't watching carefully. In the days that followed, police executed a meticulous top-to-bottom search. Dive teams scanned the Olentangy River, where a body might drift if someone fell in. K-9 units examined storm drains and overgrown riverbanks. Officers canvassed hospitals, shelters, and student apartments. They pulled trash bins and dumpsters from the Gateway complex. Surveillance from adjacent businesses was collected and pored over frame by frame. Detectives reconstructed Brian's timeline down to the minute. The escalator entrance at 1:15. The conversation outside at 1:55. The friends leaving shortly after closing. They confirmed that Brian's girlfriend, Alexis, called repeatedly that night, calls that went unanswered. The next day, she waited for him at the airport, expecting to board a flight to Miami together. When he didn't show up, panic erupted from Hope. Authorities also examined Schaffer's cell phone records, bank withdrawals, credit card use. Nothing after April 1st. Not a single digital imprint. Investigators requested Brian's medical school, workplace, and email systems check for logins. Silence. They even monitored his social security number for any legal interaction. Again, nothing. The only flicker occurred in September 2006 when Brian's phone rang once to his friend Clint's voicemail. The ping registered from a cell tower in Hilliard, Ohio, northwest of Columbus. Engineers from the phone carrier later determined the signal was likely a result of a glitch or an automated network action, not an actual call from the phone. Nevertheless, investigators scoured fields and wooded areas near the tower. No evidence was found. Years passed, and the case hardened into one of the most confounding investigations Columbus had ever handled. It became a symbol of modern mystery. The idea that in an age of surveillance and digital footprints, someone could still slip away without leaving a trace. The emotional toll became profound. Brian's father, Randy, stayed in constant contact with police and continued public appeals, refusing to let hope fade. He attended press conferences, pleading directly to the camera for his son's return. Journalists who interviewed him at the time described him as a man torn between grief and determination. His candlelight vigils drew crowds of strangers who had never met Brian, but felt personally touched by the story. A medical student who had survived life's primary heartbreak, yet succumbed to something far more incomprehensible. In 2008, tragedy struck again when Randy died unexpectedly after being hit by a falling tree branch during a storm. Obituaries online carried messages of support, and one disturbing entry: "Dad, I love you. Love, Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands." Investigators traced the IP address to a public computer in Franklin County, a cruel hoax. Randy died without answers about his son. Detectives remained candid about what made the disappearance so chilling. In a lecture for investigators, one officer explained, "If a person walks into a bar and the camera records it, you expect it to record them leaving." That logic betrayed them. The system designed to monitor and protect failed, or perhaps worked perfectly and still wasn't enough. The ugly truth was this: cameras cannot follow every step, every door, every second. Blind spots exist in technology and in human attention. Crime analysts revisiting the case often refer to a fundamental surveillance law. Coverage is not continuous, only sampled. If a person stands in one spot long enough, cameras catch them. If they move quickly through unlit corners, they don't. The space behind the ugly tuna had too many of those gaps. Deep recesses of shadows. Stairwells partially built and barricaded. No automated lens to reveal movement. That was the killer variable. Not a person. Not even a force. Just a blind space in human planning. No confirmed suspect was ever identified. Police publicly stated that no one, including Brian's friends, was ever charged or named as responsible for his disappearance. The investigation is still officially active, categorized as an unresolved missing adult case. No manner of disappearance, accident, voluntary departure, or crime has ever been determined by authorities. In March 2021, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation released an age progression image of Brian as he might appear at age 42. 15 years had passed. The image, while hopeful, also underscored a harsh truth. Brian could still be alive somewhere, unaware of how much the world searched for him, or unable to return. But after so many years devoid of financial, medical, or digital activity tied to his identity, investigators struggle to simultaneously embrace possibility and acknowledge reality. As one detective put it, "There's what we can prove, and what we fear." Brian's case influenced statewide law enforcement, leading to improved missing adult protocols. Officers now treat such disappearances more urgently and conduct earlier, more extensive searches before a case turns to cold ground. That legacy, procedural reform, may be the only definitive change born from his absence. Yet one unsolved fact keeps investigators awake. Brian was a medical student being trained to heal, surrounded by friends and hundreds of strangers in a public place. He stepped into frame and walked out of reality. The city watched the video again and again, as if replaying it might break the curse of uncertainty. For the Columbus Division of Police, the story remains one continuous question. For his friends and the remaining members of his family, it remains a wound that refuses to close. The Ugly Tuna Saloon has since shut down, but investigators still return to the footage, searching for something. A detail overlooked, a silhouette obscured. Cold cases haunt because they lack endings. Law enforcement relies on resolution, on arrest records and case files stamped closed. But what happens when a case refuses to comply? What happens when a person simply disappears? Years stretch forward, yet the moment on camera remains fixed in time. A summer night of laughter and music. A short chat at the entrance. A turn inward. And then, nothing. No one has ever found his phone. No one has ever found his clothes. No one has ever come forward with verified information placing him alive or dead. On anniversaries of his disappearance, news stations in Ohio air the footage again. The public holds its breath as the timestamp changes. 1:55 a.m. Brian standing. 1:56 a.m. Gone. The faint hum of mechanical escalators vibrates through the memory of that night, a reminder that everything appeared normal, but normal was never real. Something else was happening. Something silent. No digital alert, no traceable movement, no final sighting. How can someone be intelligent, physically strong, socially connected, and visible, then become invisible in seconds? In its coldest interpretation, the case challenges our assumption of safety in public spaces. We feel protected by crowds and lighting and cameras. We believe that in a city as populated as Columbus, simply being among others keeps danger at bay. Brian Schaffer's disappearance dismantles that belief entirely. It is a reminder that disappearance is not solely a wilderness phenomenon. It can occur at the heart of a metropolis, between laughter and last call. His story forces investigators to admit that even modern policing has limits. GPS signals fail, video frames skip, alibis blur, buildings change shape, construction sites hide answers. Every solution comes with a flaw waiting to be exploited. The case sits where science meets uncertainty. It is the kind of mystery that demands a culprit. Not a person, but a question. Where did Brian go? After all this time, every possibility still lives. He could be alive. He could be gone. He could be out there somewhere, or right beneath the path people walk every day. The truth has not yet chosen a side. The disappearance of Brian Schaffer remains one of the most unnerving unsolved mysteries in Ohio. A case with no confirmed crime. Scene, no confirmed offender, no victim recovery, and no end. The Columbus Division of Police keeps his case open and monitored. The FBI keeps his file active through VICAP. The public keeps looking. Case 3. The murder of Amy Mihaljevich, Bay Village, Ohio, an idyllic suburban town just west of Cleveland. In the fall of 1989, it was the kind of place parents felt safe letting their children roam. tree-lined streets, tight-knit neighborhoods, the kind of community where tragedy always felt like something that happened somewhere else. But on October 27th, that illusion was shattered. That afternoon, 10-year-old Amy Renee Mihalyevich vanished after school. She'd been lured to a local shopping plaza by a stranger, someone who knew her name, who knew just enough about her life to earn her trust, and who disappeared with her before anyone could notice. What followed would become one of Ohio's most haunting and relentless unsolved crimes, a mystery that, to this day, has never been closed. Amy was in 5th grade at Bay Middle School. Her life, by all accounts, was happy and ordinary. Her parents, Margaret and Mark Mihalyevich, had recently separated but remained actively involved in Amy's life. She was bright, confident, and loved horseback riding. On the morning of her disappearance, Amy had gone to school like any other day. No one knew that she'd received a phone call days earlier, possibly more than one, from a man claiming he wanted to help her buy a gift for her mother, who had just received a promotion at work. Amy confided in a close friend about the call. She seemed excited, not afraid. It was this carefully planned manipulation that set everything in motion. Around 2:05 p.m. on that Friday, Amy left school and walked to Bay Square Shopping Plaza, a familiar open-air mall less than a mile away. Witnesses saw her waiting near the ice cream parlor. Then she was seen talking to a man. He appeared to be in his early 30s, taller than average, with dark hair. He placed a hand on her shoulder. They walked off together, disappearing into the crowd. That was the last confirmed sighting of Amy alive. By that evening, when Amy failed to come home, panic set in. Her mother called police around 5 p.m., and a search began. What should have been a brief investigation ballooned into a statewide hunt. Hundreds of officers, FBI agents, and volunteers combed woods, fields, and parking lots. Her story hit national news within days, but despite the attention and dozens of reported sightings, there was no sign of Amy. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. It would be over 3 months before the search ended. On February 8, 1990, a jogger running along a rural road in Ruggles Township, 50 miles southwest of Bay Village, stumbled upon a body. It was partially buried under brush in a field just off County Road 1181. Dental records confirmed what everyone feared. It was Amy. She had been murdered. The details of Amy's death were kept private. For years, out of respect for the family and to protect the integrity of the case. It was later revealed that she had been stabbed in the neck, possibly sexually assaulted, and left in the field soon after her abduction. A curtain or blanket, believed to have come from the suspect's vehicle or home, was found with her. No DNA, no fingerprints, no weapon. But Amy's riding boots were missing, never recovered, and her book bag and earrings were gone too. Investigators believed the killer took them as trophies. In the early stages of the investigation, the FBI interviewed hundreds of people, followed thousands of leads, and maintained a physical evidence locker filled with notebooks, drawings, fibers, and more. The scope of the investigation was massive, one of the largest in Ohio history. Over time, though, the case grew colder. Suspects came and went. One man, an art teacher, remained under the microscope for years. His connection to Amy through a school visit, plus rumors about his past, made him a person of interest. But despite intense scrutiny, no charges were filed. To this day, he has never been publicly named by authorities as the prime suspect. In the 2000s, forensic science advanced. Investigators hoped DNA technology would reveal what traditional methods could not. In 2006, the FBI used a vacuum-based DNA collection system called MVAC on Amy's clothing. It yielded some results, but not enough for a match. Hair and fiber analysis, handwriting comparisons, and even geoprofiling were all employed. Still, the case stalled. Then, in 2013, a major breakthrough, one that flew under the radar. Detectives revealed that before Amy's disappearance, several other young girls in nearby towns had received strange phone calls. The caller always used a similar story. Their mother had gotten a promotion, and they needed help choosing a gift. The girls all turned down the invitation, except Amy. Investigators concluded the killer had likely been practicing his manipulation, refining his script until he succeeded. In 2019, the case was officially reclassified as a hot case. A new team began re-interviewing witnesses, reprocessing evidence, and seeking help from retired profilers and forensic experts. Ohio's Attorney General and Bay Village Police now host a public-facing cold case webpage for Amy. They continue to ask for tips and leads. To date, over 20,000 have been reviewed. Several suspects remain under investigation, but no charges have been filed. In 2021, a new witness came forward, a woman who was also targeted by the same man in the late 80s. Her account aligned with the known pattern. Her call was logged. Her interview recorded. The FBI confirmed the information was credible. Still, without a name, without a match, the killer remains free. Amy's parents divorced in the years following her murder. Her mother, Margaret, became an advocate for missing children and often spoke at schools and events. She passed away in 2001, never seeing her daughter's killer brought to justice. Her father, Mark, remains hopeful. "All it takes is one person to come forward," he once said. There is no statute of limitations on murder in Ohio. The case remains open. The curtain, the fibers, the unknown DNA. Each piece of evidence waits for technology or conscience to catch up. Detectives believe the killer was someone local, someone familiar with Amy's routines, and possibly someone known to the community. 35 years later, the case of Amy Mihaljevic is more than a cold case. It's a cautionary tale about calculated predators, about the illusion of safety, and about how even in small towns, darkness doesn't knock. It walks in. The man who killed her may still be out there, aging, hiding, waiting. But so are the answers. And every day, the case file is reopened. Case 4. The disappearance of Erica Baker, 1999, Kettering, OH. On the chilly afternoon of February 7, 1999, 9-year-old Erica Baker set out to walk her dog near her home in Kettering, Ohio. She never returned. The dog was later found wandering alone, dragging its leash. That moment marked the beginning of one of Ohio's most haunting missing child cases. Erica was last seen walking her dog near Indian Riffle Park, a popular area adjacent to the Kettering Recreation Complex. The neighborhood was quiet that Sunday, ordinary, peaceful. But when the dog returned home without Erica, alarm bells went off immediately. Authorities launched a wide-scale search within hours. Helicopters hovered over treetops. Ponds were drained. Bloodhounds sniffed through woods, and volunteers canvassed the surrounding neighborhoods on foot and horseback. Ground-penetrating radar was used around the park, and nearby storm drains were opened and searched. Nothing. No signs of a struggle. No pieces of clothing. No body. Erica had simply vanished into thin air. The Kettering Police Department took the lead, launching one of the largest investigations in the city's history. They were soon joined by the FBI and Ohio Highway Patrol, with resources pulled from across state lines. Search teams from Texas EquuSearch Midwest later joined the effort, helping coordinate large-scale ground-based searches. Law enforcement followed every tip that came in, no matter how far-fetched. Over the years, the case remained active. Detectives rotated, leads evolved, and new eyes re-reviewed the old files. But as time passed, the investigation moved from a manhunt into a cold case, with no physical evidence tying anyone to her disappearance. The biggest obstacle was the absence of a body. Without Erica's remains, prosecutors had no physical proof to pursue homicide charges. The trail was built on circumstantial evidence, unreliable witness statements, and speculation. Years passed, and the geography of the case eroded. Rumors circulated. Some said she was buried beneath a construction site. Others whispered she was hidden in a pond that no longer existed. Even more damaging were the shifting stories from Christian J. Gabriel, a man who emerged as a key witness, and eventually, a suspect. His accounts varied over time, often contradicting themselves. With no clear crime scene and no remains, investigators had only fragments of a story they couldn't fully reconstruct. Unlike many cold cases, the breakthrough wasn't scientific, it was legal. In 2005, 6 years after Erica vanished, Christian J. Gabriel was finally brought to trial, not for murder, but for related offenses. After a lengthy investigation and court process in Montgomery County Common Pleas Court, Gabriel was convicted of tampering with evidence, Ohio Revised Code 2921, 12A1, and gross abuse of a corpse, RC 2927.01b. According to court testimony, Gabriel admitted to accidentally hitting Erica with a van, then disposing of her body to avoid consequences. But because no remains were found, prosecutors couldn't prove intent or foul play beyond the non-homicide charges. He was sentenced to 5 years for tampering and 1 year for abuse of a corpse, served concurrently. Christian J. Gabriel remains the only person convicted in connection to Erica Baker's disappearance. However, he was never charged with homicide, and no further suspects have been arrested or publicly named. After serving his sentence, Gabriel was released. Local media tracked his post-release movements for a time, sparking public concern and outrage. But ultimately, no new legal action has been taken against him. His accounts have remained inconsistent, and no additional evidence has emerged to charge him with Erica's death. To this day, Erica Baker is still classified as a missing person. Her body has never been found. Gabriel's alleged version of events, a tragic accident followed by panic and concealment, has not been confirmed in court. With no remains, no crime scene, and no corroborating evidence, the case remains open. For Erica's family, the absence of closure is a wound that never heals. They've been left to imagine the unimaginable while hoping someone, somewhere, might still come forward with the truth. Erica's family never stopped searching. Neither did the community. Every few years, a renewed effort unfolds, whether through volunteer-led search events, prayer vigils, or social media campaigns. The Kettering Police Department continues to partner with Miami Valley Crime Stoppers, offering a standing reward for credible information. Erica's photo still appears on missing posters and digital billboards. Her name is invoked in local media anytime a new lead surfaces. For the people of Kettering, this case is personal. It represents a child who never came home, and a truth still buried in silence. If you are enjoying this content, like, subscribe, and share to your loved ones to protect them from the same tragic happening to them in the future. Case 5. The disappearance of Ronald Tamman Jr., 1953. Oxford, Miami University, OH. On the quiet evening of April 19, 1953, a 19-year-old sophomore at Miami University walked out of his dorm room and into history. Ronald Henry Tamman Jr. had just experienced what many believed was a harmless prank. A fish placed in his bed by fellow students. Annoyed, but not visibly shaken, he left his dormitory, Fisher Hall, to reportedly exchange his bed linens. He never came back. His room remained eerily undisturbed. Radio playing, lights on, his wallet, keys, and open book still where he left them. But Ronald was gone. That Sunday evening, campus life unfolded as usual. Students moved between dorm rooms, caught up on reading, and prepared for a new week. Ronald, known for his quiet discipline and involvement on campus, was in Fisher Hall with his roommate. Around 8 p.m., he reportedly discovered the prank, a fish left in his bed. Ronald, not one to make a scene, told his roommate he was heading to the dorm manager, often referred to as the dorm mom, to request clean sheets. Witnesses confirmed that he made this exchange, but from that moment forward, Ronald Tamman was never seen again. By morning, the reality set in. His roommate awoke to find the lights still burning, Ronald's belongings untouched. The radio hummed quietly beside his open textbook, yet Ronald hadn't slept in his bed. He hadn't returned. Authorities were notified, and by the afternoon of April 20th, Ronald was reported missing. From the outside, it looked as if he'd simply stepped out and never returned. But what followed was anything but simple. The disappearance immediately drew the attention of the Oxford Police Department, who coordinated with university officials to launch a campus-wide search. Dormitory residents were interviewed, buildings combed through, and nearby woods explored. Flyers were printed and distributed, and Ronald's name was added to regional and later national missing person registries. As the days turned into weeks, External agencies like the Ohio Highway Patrol and eventually the FBI lent their expertise. Still, no trace emerged. The case was eventually listed under NamUs MP 4523 and remains on the Ohio Attorney General's Missing Adult Registry. Despite the limited forensic tools available in the early 1950s, authorities pursued leads with urgency. Campus folklore and student rumors swirled, ranging from abduction to voluntary disappearance, but none were ever confirmed. What began as a campus concern quickly grew into a statewide mystery. The decades that followed Ronald's disappearance were filled with missed opportunities and the challenges of a pre-digital era. One of the most significant hurdles was the absence of physical evidence. Ronald left behind no note, no sign of a struggle, and no body. His disappearance lacked any clear point of exit or documented direction. The scattered eyewitness accounts, though well-intentioned, provided no definitive leads. Additionally, mid-century, investigative methods lacked the sophistication we take for granted today. There were no DNA databases, no traffic cameras, and no comprehensive cross-agency coordination. Ronald's case records were dispersed across different jurisdictions and departments. Some files were misplaced or misfiled over time. Other agencies closed the case in their systems once their own jurisdictional search ended, causing gaps in continuity. Years later, unconfirmed sightings would emerge from various states, including reports from people who believed they'd seen Ronald in out-of-state motels or bus stations. But every lead ultimately led nowhere. As the trail grew colder, frustration settled in. For his family and those close to him, there were only questions. Questions that would go unanswered for generations. In most cases, time either reveals the truth or buries it deeper. Unfortunately for Ronald's loved ones, the latter seemed to prevail. No forensic breakthrough has ever been confirmed. Unlike modern cold cases that are solved through DNA advancements, Ronald's disappearance lacked biological evidence to test. There was no hair, no clothing, no remains, nothing that could tie him to a physical space after that Sunday evening. What did persist, however, was interest. Over the years, Miami University students, faculty, and amateur sleuths kept the case alive through research, blog posts, and anniversary memorials. University archives were combed for overlooked documents. Journalists and true crime writers reached out to surviving witnesses and former investigators. Reports surfaced of comparative checks being run against unidentified remains in other states, especially in the Midwest. None of those comparisons yielded a match. One theory that gained attention centered on a decades-old John Doe case from Georgia. Some believed the physical resemblance was striking, and efforts were made to compare dental records. But ultimately, no match was established. Theories about military recruitment, secret identities, and even witness protection emerged, many driven by speculation rather than fact. What remained certain was that no confirmed breakthrough ever brought Ronald home. After more than 70 years, no individual has ever been formally named as a suspect in Ronald Tammann's disappearance. No arrests were made, and no charges filed. It remains an open missing person case, not a confirmed crime. Investigators throughout the years emphasized that they could not determine whether Ronald left voluntarily, encountered foul play, or suffered an accident. The complete absence of evidence made the case impossible to classify. That legal uncertainty shaped the investigation from the start. Because Ronald was 19 at the time, authorities initially entertained the possibility that he left on his own. He wasn't a child. He had no known enemies or mental health concerns. He was financially stable and socially active. Without signs of coercion or violence, the case fell into a legal gray area. And in that space, it remained suspended, never solved, never closed. To this day, Ronald Tammann's case remains one of the most baffling unsolved disappearances in American college history. No definitive resolution has ever been reached. His status is still classified as missing, and his file remains open with the Ohio Attorney General's office. Theories range from the mundane to the extreme, but none have been substantiated. Theories about Ronald's state of mind continue to surface. Some say he was under pressure from academics and quietly left to escape. Others believe he may have been recruited or forced into government work during the Cold War. More speculative accounts even suggest covert operations or espionage. But these remain in the realm of possibility, not proof. What's undeniably missing is closure. For his family, friends, and the Miami University community, the lack of answers is a wound that has never healed. Decades later, people still ask the same question. How does someone vanish without a trace in a dormitory filled with people? Ronald's disappearance didn't just affect his immediate family. It became part of Miami University's legacy. Students pass by the site of the former Fisher Hall, now replaced by other buildings, unaware that it once held one of Ohio's most persistent mysteries. Over the years, the university has hosted programs, lectures, and student projects dedicated to Ronald's story. His face, often shown in black and white photos, is etched into the memory of the campus. Family members continued to advocate for answers. They participated in interviews, wrote letters to public officials, and collaborated with journalists who wanted to keep the case in the public eye. The Tamman family, despite their grief, remained composed and focused on facts. They never gave in to the more dramatic theories unless supported by evidence. Their approach helped keep Ronald's case from being reduced to a mere campus legend. Miami University alumni often cite Ronald's disappearance as a haunting reminder of how quickly life can change, and how vital it is to protect institutional memory. In 2003, the 50th anniversary of his disappearance drew renewed media attention. Investigators reviewed the case again, hoping that advances in technology or a long silent witness might break the stalemate. But still, no concrete development followed. The case continues to be discussed in classrooms, community forums, and podcasts. Each time it's told, the hope is the same, that someone, somewhere, might remember something, a detail, a face, a location. Because even now, more than 70 years later, Ronald Henry Tamman Jr. remains missing, his story waiting for an ending. Case 6. The Escape of Lester Eubanks, 1973. Escape. Offense 1965. Mansfield Richland Co. OH National. On December 7, 1973, a man convicted of one of Ohio's most haunting crimes was allowed to walk freely into a department store just days before Christmas. But when authorities returned to escort him back to prison, he was nowhere to be found. His name was Lester Eubanks, and somehow he vanished. Not from some maximum security breakout or dramatic ambush, but from a holiday shopping trip. Over 50 years later, his story still sends shockwaves through law enforcement and chills down the spine of every parent in America. How could a man like Eubanks be granted such freedom? And how has he managed to evade capture for so long? Lester Eubanks was no minor offender. In 1965, he had been convicted and sentenced to death for taking the life of 14-year-old Mary Ellen Diener in Mansfield, Ohio. The case shook the community and left a permanent mark on her grieving family. Initially sentenced to be executed, Eubanks's punishment was later commuted to life in prison after the Ohio Supreme Court temporarily abolished the death penalty. For nearly a decade, he served time at the Ohio State Penitentiary without incident. But in a shocking decision, prison officials granted him a temporary furlough in 1973 as part of a rehabilitation program that allowed certain inmates to go Christmas shopping unsupervised. The logic behind that policy still baffles many. On the day of his furlough, Eubanks was transported to a shopping plaza in Columbus. He was dressed in civilian clothes with cash in his pocket. The guards dropped him off and agreed to pick him up later that afternoon. But when they returned, there was no sign of him. No confrontation, no struggle. Just an empty sidewalk and a vanished fugitive. In the days that followed, panic spread across law enforcement agencies throughout Ohio. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Lester Eubanks had a head start no one could catch up with. The Ohio Adult Parole Authority immediately issued an escape warrant, initiating the first wave of the manhunt. Local police joined the effort, but jurisdiction quickly expanded. With no electronic footprints to follow and no reliable sightings in the immediate aftermath, the case began to cool. Years passed, then decades. Eubanks's name occasionally surfaced in law enforcement circles, but with every passing year, the paper trail grew colder. That changed in 1994 when the U.S. Marshal Service, Northern District of Ohio, reopened the case and assigned it to Marshal Pete Elliott's team. Their renewed focus brought new energy to the investigation. They re-interviewed old witnesses, tracked down known associates, and tried to piece together a fugitive's life from the fragments of the past. In 2016, Lester Eubanks's name was added to the U.S. Marshal's 15 Most Wanted list. The move was both strategic and symbolic. It signaled to the public and to Eubanks that his case had not been forgotten. It also opened new avenues for funding, publicity, and public engagement. With the help of television coverage and national media, tip lines began to ring again. Some reports claimed sightings in Michigan. Others pointed to Alabama, Georgia, or California. Each lead sparked a flurry of activity, only to fade into silence. The manhunt became one of the most confounding in U.S. criminal history. The failures in the Eubanks case were not due to lack of effort, but to the limitations of the era. In 1973, law enforcement did not have centralized databases or real-time communication tools. Fingerprint matches were manual. DNA databases didn't exist. And for someone like Eubanks, who had a head start and the cunning to change identities, the gaps between agencies were easy to exploit. He could cross state lines with minimal scrutiny, apply for new documents under assumed names, and blend into communities without raising suspicion. Several times over the years, authorities believed they were close, but without concrete identification methods, they couldn't confirm the man they were watching was truly him. There was also the matter of accountability. Critics have long questioned how a man convicted of such a serious offense was ever placed in a situation where escape was even possible. Documents from the time suggest that Eubanks had been considered a model inmate, prompting prison officials to include him in a furlough program that would be unthinkable today. But the decision proved catastrophic. In the years that followed, internal memos and reports revealed a bureaucratic shuffle that allowed responsibility for the escape to diffuse among multiple agencies. No single entity held the reins, and as a result, no one was fully able to steer the search forward. For decades, the Eubanks case hovered in a limbo of speculation and frustration. Then, in 2020, investigators gained a new foothold. With advances in forensic science and renewed public interest, the U.S. Marshal Service uncovered new leads involving potential DNA evidence tied to Eubanks's family. While the exact details remain classified, officials publicly acknowledged that they had obtained updated biological samples from relatives. This allowed them to build a clearer genetic profile for Eubanks, something they never had in the original investigation. Alongside this breakthrough, the Marshals released updated age progression images. These computer-generated renderings showed what Eubanks might look like today in his 70s, accounting for potential aging markers like hair loss, facial structure changes, and health-related weight fluctuations. These images were circulated widely, on billboards, online databases, and through national news programs. The goal was clear: put a face back on a ghost. And for the first time in years, the public was looking again. One additional breakthrough came through financial tracking. Investigators began combing through Social Security databases, banking logs, and welfare rolls, searching for activity under known aliases or forged documents. While no public statement has confirmed whether Eubanks was found, using these tools, the strategy itself marked a critical shift in how the case was being approached. Not just through traditional boots-on-the-ground tactics, but through digital forensics and network analysis. To date, Lester Eubanks remains the only individual connected to the escape. No one has ever been arrested or charged with aiding him. Authorities continue to suspect that someone, somewhere, must have helped him, at least during the initial phase of his disappearance. A man doesn't vanish for 50 years without some kind of support system. But concrete evidence of that support has yet to emerge. In 2020, the reward for information leading to his capture was increased to $50,000. That figure still stands. Multiple tip lines remain open. Investigators believe Eubanks may have assumed a new identity, started a family, or lived under the radar in a region where his face is unfamiliar. Given the length of time since his escape, there is a possibility that he may have developed health issues or passed away under an unknown name. However, without physical confirmation, the case remains open and active. As of now, Eubanks is still listed as a federal fugitive. His conviction in the 1965 offense stands, and his escape is considered a serious federal offense. Eubanks' original conviction was rooted in what prosecutors described as a premeditated attack on Mary Ellen Diener. The crime itself has been adjudicated, but its impact continues to reverberate through Ohio and beyond. The motive, according to the court records, was opportunistic, rooted in violence and control. While the legal portion of that case has long been closed, the emotional toll never has been. And the lack of physical closure, no arrest, no final reckoning, continues to haunt the family and investigators alike. What remains missing is accountability, not only for the escape itself, but for the decades that followed. There are still unanswered questions about whether Eubanks received help, what name he may be living under, and whether law enforcement failures early on allowed him to cement a second life. Without those answers, justice feels incomplete. For many, the escape is a second crime, one that denies closure to a grieving family and chips away at public confidence in the system meant to protect them. For the Diener family, the passage of time has not softened the pain. Mary Ellen's memory remains vivid among relatives, former classmates, and the wider Mansfield community. Local churches and organizations have held remembrance events to honor her life, and through every press conference, every billboard campaign, her name continues to be spoken, not as a footnote in criminal history, but as a life that mattered. Case 7. The Cleveland Torso Murders. In the mid-1930s, Cleveland's growing skyline could not conceal the shadows spreading beneath it. Economic despair from the Great Depression had forced thousands into the margins, men and women searching for work, shelter, and anonymity in the ravines and valleys surrounding the industrial flats. Kingsbury Run, a low, marshy corridor dividing downtown Cleveland from its east side, became a refuge for those society ignored. It was here, amid rusted rail bridges, discarded junk, and makeshift homes of scrap metal, that one of America's earliest unidentified serial murderers began a reign of terror that would haunt Ohio forever. Newspapers later called him the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, a title that reflected both the horror of the crimes and the frustration of law enforcement. At least 12 victims were claimed between 1935 and 1938, and for almost a century afterward, the killer remained nothing more than a phantom. His victims buried in numbered graves, their identities stolen as thoroughly as their lives. The first recognized discovery came in September 1935, when 2 bodies were found near the steep slope nicknamed Jackass Hill, close to East 49th Street. The location was remote enough that the remains could have gone undiscovered for much longer, yet close enough to downtown that the brutality represented a new kind of danger nudging into public consciousness. These victims revealed a horrifying pattern that would later define the case. Every life taken by this unknown predator was stripped of its name before the killer abandoned what was left. Across the next 3 years, more remains surfaced, scattered like chilling signatures across the landscape. One of the most recognizable of these lost individuals was found in June 1936 near the New York Central Railroad tracks. Authorities referred to him only as the Tattooed Man, a grim nickname given because his skin featured 6 distinct tattoos, including an anchor, a butterfly, and the names Helen and Paul. Tattoos often serve as personal identifiers. But despite photographs circulated across Cleveland newspapers and descriptions sent to surrounding states, no one came forward to claim him. The police took fingerprints, still considered state-of-the-art technology at the time, and even used details about his undergarments to track potential manufacturers. Nothing brought them closer to who he was. Victims continued to appear in intervals that tested the limits of Cleveland's investigative capabilities. In 1937, the Cuyahoga River carried the remains of another unidentified person to the surface, witnessed by laborers who immediately called law enforcement. A year later, in August 1938, the final confirmed victim appeared in a landfill near East 9th Street and Lakeside Avenue, right near the heart of Cleveland's core government district, almost within sight of City Hall and the office of Elliot Ness, the man responsible for public safety citywide. It was a deliberate act, or at least it felt like one. The killer, long operating on the margins, seemed to be mocking authority directly. Elliot Ness, known nationally for helping to bring down Al Capone during Prohibition, had been appointed Cleveland's public safety director in 1935. His arrival in Cleveland had been met with public optimism, reform, clean streets, progress. But the Kingsbury Run killings were unlike anything he had confronted. Ness placed the formidable detective Peter Merylo in a lead role on the case. Merylo, alongside other seasoned Cleveland Police Department investigators, launched deep probes into the shanty towns and transient encampments. He disguised himself as an unhoused laborer more than once, riding freight trains and frequenting makeshift camps, as he searched for whispers of what locals had begun calling simply the killer. The Cleveland Police Museum, which now preserves priceless photographs and death masks from that investigation, credits Merylo for tirelessly walking the tracks, knocking on doors, and treating even the most marginalized witnesses as essential voices in the hunt. The investigation extended far beyond simple questioning. Investigators consulted medical schools and physicians in the region, suspecting that the killer must have possessed some level of anatomical knowledge given the precision of the remains. They searched hospital records for signs of patients missing limbs. They traced local meatpacking facilities and morgues. They interrogated known violent offenders with military backgrounds. They even reached out to rail companies about seasonal workers who might have traveled under the radar. The killer left no words, no recognizable calling card, only remains too altered for the era's science to reverse. Forensics in the 1930s lacked blood typing standards for criminal comparison, let alone modern DNA. Clothing and fibers quickly degraded in the mud or river water. Every clue grew cold as soon as it was touched by nature. Pressure mounted from the public. The murders threatened not just lives, but civic confidence. Journalists painted Cleveland as a city where the forgotten were preyed upon, and the city itself was powerless to respond. Ness, long admired for bold action, made a fateful decision. In 1938, he ordered a massive nighttime raid on Kingsbury Run. Police forced out more than 300 unhoused residents. Roughly 100 flimsy shelters and huts were set on fire in a spectacle Ness hoped would cripple the killer's hunting grounds and restore order. Newspapers snapped photographs of billowing smoke against the skyline. Some locals cheered. Others stood silent, questioning the moral cost. The killer was not among the destroyed shelters. The raid displaced potential witnesses, obliterated uncollected physical clues, and worsened the mistrust between residents and police. It quickly became clear that the system itself was failing the case. First, the victims were nearly impossible to trace. Most were transient, disconnected from family, or heavily impoverished. Investigators could not match them to missing person files, because very few missing person files existed for people living on society's edge. Without identity, the victims' stories paused, and so did any path to discovering who benefited from their deaths. Second, forensic science was limited to a fraction of the capabilities available today. No DNA sequencing, no CODIS, no family tree algorithms, no digital case systems storing evidence in redundant backups. By the time remains were located, often days or weeks after death, fingerprints had degraded, clothing was untraceable, and any chance of linking a blade to its wound had dissolved. Finally, administrative disorganization plagued the case. Record-keeping lacked consistency. Reports disappeared, sometimes because of poor preservation, and sometimes because the priority was clearing dangerous areas, rather than solving what was seen by some officials as crimes against drifters. Years later, historians discovered that some original Cleveland police files related to the murders had gone missing entirely, and many leads simply dissolved in boxes that never reached archives. The killer was benefiting not from brilliance, but from a system incapable of sustaining a long-term criminal investigation. Even when promising suspects emerged, the evidence was insufficient for prosecution. One person of deep interest to investigators was Dr. Francis E. Sweeney, a former military surgeon who later struggled with severe psychological distress. He failed multiple lie detection tests administered by investigators, according to later accounts, and his background hinted at the anatomical skill demonstrated in the crimes. But in the 1930s, polygraph results were not admissible, and Ness lacked corroborating physical evidence to justify charging a respected veteran tied by family to influential political figures. Instead of being prosecuted, Sweeney was reportedly institutionalized in later years, leaving behind only speculation and doubt. Another man, Frank Dolezal, was arrested in connection with the death of a female victim. Before he could formally defend himself, he died in custody. Later reviews found nothing tying him solidly to the broader pattern of victims. The suspect list eventually collapsed into a haze of dead ends. No one stood trial. Not one person was officially connected to the spree. The murders eventually stopped. At least those investigators could confidently link to the same unknown individual. But history shows that disappearance doesn't equal resolution. The case simply slipped into the chilling archive of unsolved American crimes, haunting documentaries, tour guides, and late-night conversations around Ohio. The remains of many victims were buried in anonymous numbered graves, markers of the state's inability to restore their names. More than 8 decades passed before the story began to change. In 2024, the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office, under Chief M.E. Dr. Thomas Gilson, joined forces with the DNA Doe Project to exhume selected remains from the torso killings and apply forensic genetic genealogy, the same revolutionary method that has solved landmark cold cases nationwide. The first efforts focused on the tattooed man and a victim designated John Doe number 6. Their bones, fragile from decades of burial, were carefully lifted from cemetery plots and transported to controlled laboratory environments so that new DNA sequencing could be attempted. The objective was simple, yet profound: uncover who these victims were, and by doing so, expand the investigative universe around them. The process is far from easy. DNA breaks down quickly under harsh burial conditions. Soil contaminants seep in. Microbes strip away fragile genetic code. But modern forensic science has proven able to resurrect identities from remains older than these, using advanced whole genome sequencing, mitochondrial DNA, and genealogical databases. Analysts study any viable genetic strands and search for distant relatives who share enough markers to build a shared family tree. Volunteer genealogists invest countless hours examining centuries of marriage records, birth ledgers, census surveys, and obituary files to stitch together a story of lineage that may eventually return a name to a lost victim. If that happens, even just once, it will be the first new identification in the case since the mid-20th century. It would allow investigators to trace a victim's final movements, build a timeline of where they lived, uncover whether they knew others in the case, and track any adversaries who hovered near them. It may even expose the first crack in the armor of a killer long believed unreachable. Legally, the case is still classified as open. The perpetrator has never been identified. The motive remains speculative, though several professionals believe the killer specifically targeted those least likely to be missed, an act that speaks volumes about cruelty, advantage, and social neglect. Stranger still, the killer stopped, or at least changed behavior in ways that ended the recognized pattern. Investigators accept that the person responsible could have died or been institutionalized. Without DNA linking a suspect to victims, the killer remains beyond the reach of prosecution, even posthumously. What sets this case apart is not just the absence of justice, but the absence of remembrance. Many victims died without their names spoken, without loved ones called, without closure. Today, the Cleveland Police Museum preserves death masks crafted from the victims' faces, blank expressions preserved in plaster, stark reminders that identity is a right no one should lose, even in death. These artifacts have become substitutes for headstones, and genealogists act as the surrogate family who refuses to let these souls remain unacknowledged. Cleveland has changed since the 1930s. Kingsbury Run is no longer a sprawling shantytown. It's a reminder of what the city endured, of how easily people can become invisible when resources thin and hope erodes. Yet, as advanced DNA tools begin to uncover the origins of those buried long ago, the city is forced to confront a truth. The victims mattered then, and they matter still. Every new clue pushes back against nearly 90 years of silence. The Cleveland torso murders remain unsolved not because investigators failed to care, but because the tools weren't there to transform tangled threads into answers. Now, science is doing what the 1930s could not. It is giving voices back to people who were erased. As those identities emerge, their stories will reshape everything investigators once believed about this case. And when victims begin to speak through DNA, suspects, if still alive, will have nowhere left to hide. This case presents a sobering reminder. A killer exploited a moment in time when the railroad made travel easy, when depression made disappearance common, and when the city had little means to protect those who were already living unseen. The predator's success wasn't driven by genius, but by the world's neglect. The story is not finished. The exhumations underway at the direction of the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner are only the prologue of a new investigative era. The goal is not merely to identify remains. It is to resurrect lives, map lost histories, and tighten investigative boundaries until truth emerges. Modern Cleveland carries the responsibility its predecessors could not bear, to finally give names, answers, and closure to a case that has defined the city's darkest chapter. Some crimes wait for their moment to be solved. Nearly a century later, that moment may finally be here. The question that now remains is this: if science can uncover the identity of those lost near the rail lines and creek beds, what will that reveal about the person who walked freely among them? Where are you watching from? Drop your locations in the comments below. If you made it to this point, drop your comment with "I am still here." Let's see who is still watching.